Back again. Before we get into Robert Gregory, who's the CEO and President of the Australian Jewish Association, now I'll play this clip, which features Robert, but also I'd like to ask him about and talk a little bit about the right of free speech. It's all very well having free speech, but you need to hear both sides, and you need, and if they're only words, so what? Coming into Australia, people need to be given that chance to speak, providing it's not inciting any violence. And that, at the moment, we find government doing what government does best, and that's, to, as we would say in the classics, I'll be nice here, to mess things up. We have a couple of Jewish people that have been banned from entering Australia because of Israeli politics. Cam, can you play the clip, please?
Actually, the position of the Australian government is quite Islamophobic. They basically say that if you are part of the Islamic community, you support Hamas.
Australia, once known as one of the West's strongest liberal democracies, is now making headlines for banning Jews who hold mainstream Israeli right-wing views from entering its borders. Former Minister Ayelet Shaked, influencer and tech advisor Hillel Fold, and now Israeli member of Knesset Simcha Rothman, all denied visas, their political opinions deemed unacceptable. They go into the kinds of views and the kinds of statements that they consider to be posing a risk to a segment of the Australian community, which they explicitly say is the Islamic community. The visa holder's social media and public statements mirror the policies of his party, including the elimination of Hamas.
Say, if you're part of Islamic communities, and if you will hear someone saying you should eliminate Hamas, you will be radicalized and outraged. I think it's a terrible thing to say on the Islamic community in Australia.
It's outrageous. I mean, this is the minister in the department that's responsible for applying Australia's anti-terrorism laws. And if they have a problem with eliminating a terrorist group, that's a major, major concern. The Australian Jewish community has had a very difficult 2 years. Almost every single week, there's a major anti-Jewish incident. Simcha coming and speaking in Jewish schools and synagogues poses no threat whatsoever to the Muslim community.
Okay, back now. Just latest news, by the way. Anthony Albanese has expelled Iran's ambassador from Australia and accused the nation of orchestrating extraordinary and dangerous acts of aggression on home soil. And, you know, if that is correct, and has been verified by Australia's spy agency ASIO, said that Iran was responsible for a string of anti-Semitic attacks in Australia in a bombshell finding that has prompted the expulsion of Iran's ambassador, and so they should be, because anything to do with violence, you get rid of it. Robert Gregory is CEO and President of the Australian Jewish Association. Robert, bit left field here for you, but what's your thoughts on the Iran ambassador being booted out?
So I got to say, I'm not surprised by this, even though it sounds like big news. It's something we called for a long time. Iran has a history of doing these type of activities in other countries. We warned the government in submissions to parliament that they should expel the ambassador. In many media reports, you'll find us warning them, and not just us, other Jewish groups and the Iranian diaspora, people who fled Iran, who say that the Iranian embassy here had agents here that were monitoring them, that were engaged in these kind of activities. So we're not surprised. We think the government obviously made the right decision, but many years too late. No country should be carrying out terrorist attacks or violent attacks inside Australia. And so we're happy with the response. But again, I wouldn't give the government too much credit because they're acting after the horse is bolted in this case.
Just here, for example, one of the Australia cancels Israeli politicians' visa just days before a speaking tour begins. That's a senior MP. Her name was Simcha Rothman, and she was slapped with a 3-year ban. And Sky News says that they spoke to Minister Burke, and he said, if you're coming to Australia to spread messages of hate, we don't want you here. Can you tell me what her reason for the visit was?
So the visit had been arranged because I just recently returned from Israel, and people in Israel are worried about some of the incidents that are occurring in Australia. Some of the incidents that now we're hearing are connected with the Iranian ambassador. So they want this MP wanted to come to express support. A solidarity mission was scheduled to speak inside synagogues, Jewish schools. So it was really within the Jewish community to express support. The visa was applied for about 5 weeks ago. It had been approved 10 days before arrival, and then a few hours before the Knesset member was due to go to the airport, all of a sudden got the news that it had now been revoked.
Which is, I mean, again, we don't want hate speech at all, but if it's something you don't want to hear, it's not hate speech. So what? Because isn't that the idea of free speech? And it's, if you look at, go back a couple of years with COVID, for example, when they stopped doctors from talking, scientists from talking, and there was no discussion at all about COVID. You can see what sort of situation we got into, and I don't think we're going to get out for a long time. So surely something like this, even though we may not agree with Mr. Rothman, for him to come out here, it's always better to hear it from, as they say, from the horse's mouth than not to hear it at all. And doesn't that really say a lot about our belief in free speech? Because if we don't want to hear some people and we want to hear other people, surely that's not free speech at all.
Well, it's very concerning, and these type of bans always seem to happen to politicians and people on one side of politics. My organization did not support the ban on Candace Owens coming out, even though we disagree with some of the things she said. In the interest of free speech, it's important to have these views held. With the caveat, as you said, someone who's directly inciting violence, someone who's coming out and telling people to harm others, obviously that's different, or someone who's a criminal or a terrorist, that is different. But in the interest of free speech, we should be allowing multiple opinions. But I think this case is even worse because it's not just a member of parliament, but a member of the government of another country, and it's someone who already had the visa approved. So if there was any issue with something he'd said previously, don't issue the visa, ask for clarification, handle it quietly, but we can't just revoke the visa of a prominent member of another government a few hours before they get on the flight. Of course, it's going to make a diplomatic storm. It's not the way you act in free speech, and it's not the way you act in diplomacy.
No, I totally agree with you. I think, and it's probably a message that Australia was sending to Israel and also Mr. Rothman. I just want to know, why was Mr. Rothman banned?
So I've seen the paperwork. There's about 10 reasons given. Some of them are really quite extreme, as we heard in that clip you played, that one of them literally, he'd called to eliminate Hamas. So it said that this kind of words could inflame certain communities, which is crazy because Hamas is a terrorist group under Australian law. So theoretically, even Australia should want to eliminate it. There were other reasons connected to internal Israeli policies that I don't think anyone in Australia knows about, cares about. So Mr. Rothman had been leading the judicial reform, which is a move a couple of years ago to take power away from some of the activist courts in Israel and return them to the elected government. But again, I mean, that's an internal Israeli issue. Probably the most controversial reason was a statement attributed to him from a media interview where a journalist, he was doing the interview in English, and I think it is taken out of context. I think if you listen to it, you'll see he doesn't actually say these words. A journalist says some words, to the effect of that the children of Gaza are your enemies, and he answers sort of affirming that. But I think if you listen in the context, obviously English is not his first language. I don't think it's as clear. But in either case, this is a old quote. So the government knew about this, when they approved the visa, and if there was an issue with it, I think that there would be a different way to handle it. It wasn't particularly extreme. So those are some of the reasons given.
Yeah, and again, I can understand this is a message being sent by the Australian government, and we know what their stance is at the moment. And I think we're all in agreement here, no matter where you are in the world, that we need to stop killing. But that just doesn't exist in the Middle East. The same thing for Ukraine and other parts of the world too. I mean, if you look at Christianity in where is it? In Africa, for example, there's been a whole number of people that have been Christians that have been absolutely massacred. Yet no one's talking about that, by the way. I think it's wise to be able to hear people and to get an opinion, or to because when you stop talking, we have this propensity then to become, whether you want to or not, you can become bigots or very narrow-minded, and talk, whether we like it or not, is the way that we can heal the world. And I think that we need to do more talking about peace, talking about cultures and areas of the world that we live in. Whether I agree or not with Mr. Rothman, I think Mr. Rothman has a right, and I think to be heard here. But do you think maybe that the reason why they did cancel it, because if you look at the current unrest in Australia with the protests and stuff, that there may have been a cause for fearing of some sort of violence?
So I can only speak for my community, and the Jewish community has been here since the First Fleet, and I don't think there's ever been an incident, of the Jewish community violence, riots, those type of things. It's a very peaceful community. So would people opposing the talk have committed violence? I mean, if that's the case, that's not a reason to cancel someone. That's a reason to protect someone if they're going to be targeted. But even then, I mean, it was an internal Jewish community event, speaking to schools and synagogues. So it wasn't like he was going to be speaking in the CBD to a large rally. So I just don't think it would have actually resulted in any violence. And in fact, I think the attention it got because of the way the government handled it made it much more prominent. We still held one event online, and we had a screening of it, and I think it reached a lot more people than it would have, because, I mean, quite frankly, most Australians hadn't heard of this guy, but now it was in the newspapers and on television, so a lot more people heard him, and of course there was no violence or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how it was received in Israel. Can you fill us in on that?
So it was a big story in Israel. The Prime Minister reacted there, and many ministers did. The Foreign Minister. Israel as we know, is in the middle of multiple wars. So for them to take time out of their day to comment on Australian issues shows how big a reach it had. I was interviewed by various Israeli media, newspapers, and television channels, and the Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments were front-page news in Australia, calling Anthony Albanese a weak leader and revoking visas of Australian diplomats. So it caused a bit of a storm, and I think that now the Australian government has been both praised by Hamas and strongly condemned by the Israeli government. So it's not a good reputation that the government's getting.
What about our relationship now with Israel, doing business? How's that looking?
So the relationship on a diplomatic and political level is very, very damaged, and the opposition is pledging to try and restore some of that. But at the moment, I think ties are very low, which I think Australia should be concerned about, because obviously the Trump administration is very close to the Israeli government, and Australia, we now have one of our senior ministers, Richard Marles, over in America, still hasn't been able to secure a meeting with Donald Trump. We know he speaks often with Netanyahu, so I don't think this helps Australia in that regard. But in terms of business, I mean, business people are business people. I think Australia and Israel do quite a bit of trade, scientific deals and things like this. I think that will continue, although Israelis, I know a lot of Australians are worried to travel to Israel or to do business there. It goes both ways. So I've spoken to Israelis who are concerned about attending Australia for conferences. They get this idea that there's a lot of anti-Semitism. I mean, a lot of it is hyped up in the media, but there obviously are incidents occurring, and it is damaging the relationship.
What about your ambassador? I think it's Amir Maimon. he would have been in constant communications with the Australian government and our Prime Minister. Any comment from him?
So he weighed in a few times. I think the role of a diplomat is obviously to try and resolve things and keep things peaceful and under the table. So his statements weren't as strong as many of the political figures in either Australia or in Israel, and I think that's his job, to bring people together. He obviously has a very difficult job, based in Canberra and dealing with the government, and each day comes a new crisis, new criticism from the Australian government. So I don't envy his position. It's a delicate position, and I think he has put out some statements about it, and he'd be hoping to return Australia to the kind of bipartisan, strong, close relationship which we had with Israel under all previous governments until this one.
Yeah, it certainly has taken a turn for the worse. What about retaliation from Israel towards Australia?
So after the visas were refused, Israel revoked the visas of some Australian diplomats who are based in Israel but serve the Palestinian Authority-controlled areas. And they also announced that any official Australians applying for official visas to Israel would undergo extra scrutiny. So I don't think that applies to tourists, but I think any sort of government or leadership people that would want to visit may face similar revoking of visa as what happened to the Israeli politician and other Israelis here. So it's not a good thing. It's not something we want. Obviously, a lot of, I don't know what they mean by official. A lot of Australian aid organizations, education, other delegations obviously travel to Israel. So other than that, I don't know of any other retaliation. But I know with Australia planning to recognize the state of Palestine coming up in September, I wouldn't be surprised if there would be another Israeli response to that.
Let's just pop into Gaza City for a moment. Can you comment on Israel's activities in Gaza City? The world is watching, and again, we just see there is needless killing, and that's just not my own opinion. I think there's an opinion of a great portion of the world. There is a lot of needless killing, and I don't give a rat's whether, I can tell you now, whether it's Israel, Palestine, or Martians. I do care, though, very much that innocent people are being killed. So we have the Israel activities in Gaza City, which is not being portrayed as you probably expect also, but it's not being portrayed well at all for Israel. Can you give us your comments on that, please?
So what's happening in Gaza is probably the most reported conflict in the world. It certainly is at the moment. And it's not the most deadly conflict in the world. There's wars going on everywhere, not just Ukraine, but as you mentioned, in Africa, terrible things are happening. There's major wars in Congo and Sudan. These kind of issues don't get any airtime, and we have to sometimes wonder why. But the fact is, Gaza is in the news a lot, and it is a war, and tragedies and accidents and deaths and obviously happen in a war. So we should be pushing to end the war, which will end these things happening. Now, for the war to end, the Israeli hostages have to be released. Israel's not going to go back home and leave them there. So there needs to be a way to end that. Today we saw a terrible tragedy, maybe already last night in Australian time, when a hospital in Gaza was hit and people killed. The Israeli Prime Minister has come out and said it was a tragedy, and Israel's investigating what happened. But we know these accidents happen in war. Many of the Israeli deaths are due to what's called friendly fire. So obviously they don't mean to kill their own people, but the same way that innocent Gazans die, also Israelis have been killed. So this is just a terrible aspect of war, and one which, in the age of social media, in the age when everyone has a phone to record something, it's something that audiences around the world are seeing, where they perhaps would have never seen in the past. About this is what happens in war.
You mentioned hostages, and we see the odd report pop up here and there of dissension or conviction from Israelis who are now saying and asking the question, does the government really want to save those hostages, or is this just piece of the propaganda most likely, or is it just the words speak for the day? Because if you see what's happening at the moment, and if there are hostages in Gaza, surely you're putting your own hostages at risk.
Well, there's no easy answer. So the track record has been that when Israel increases military pressure, it often has led to these temporary ceasefires where hostages have been released and the war stopped for a period of time. And now most of the hostages are back home, or there was about 250 people kidnapped, and there's about 20 or so still alive there, and a total of about 50, including bodies. So the vast majority are back in Israel. So there is obviously a record of trying to get them back. The hostage families are divided. The majority of them, I would say, just say, make a deal at any cost, release whoever you have to, stop the war, do anything, get our families back, which is very understandable. But obviously, as the Prime Minister needs to weigh up, what the military is saying, what the hostage families are saying. Often we do see protests in the street in Israel. They're often led by the opposition, which are, anything's a political movement. So many of them are calling for urgently to get the hostages back. But it's not clear that at the end of the day, Hamas will release all the hostages in any deal. And both the Biden administration and the Trump administration said that the reason the talks would fall apart was because of Hamas, not because of Israel. So it's obviously very difficult. There may be a partial deal, some more hostages out. Ideally, there should be a deal to release all the hostages and end the war, and can focus on what needs to happen after that.
Is this what's the number one objective of this? Is it to have the hostages released, or is it to eliminate Hamas?
So that's a very good question, and it would depend who you ask. So a lot of people would say, if you get the hostages back and you leave Hamas, you're going to be back in this situation, whether it's in 6 months, a year, 2 years. So you need to remove them, because we know Hamas has said they'll do this again and again. So there'd be people that say, okay, 20 hostages, that's very important, but if you have another attack, it'll kill another 1,000 people or whatever. So you need to make sure it won't happen again. Then obviously there is the concern for human life and the concern for the hostages. I was just in Israel, and there's pictures of them everywhere. There's chairs set up everywhere, empty chairs saying, we wish you were here. So I think these two competing goals, and again, most of both of these goals have been achieved. So most hostages are back, and Hamas is mostly destroyed. Almost all its leadership is dead. Most of its weapons are gone. So I'd say we're 90% there on both of them. But again, how do you get the final, how do you get rid of the final bit of Hamas? You may not be able to. And how do you get back those final few hostages? Again, I hope it's possible, but it may not be.
Yeah, again, we see innocent people dying, and no one is exempt from God here. And God He will judge, if not sooner rather than later. But I'm just thinking, though, Hamas, a terrorist organisation, and it is, it has immense hatred for Israel, which we both admit to, and vice versa too, because Hamas are a terrible organisation. However, the amount of killing certainly hasn't quelled the hatred. In fact, it's fueled the fire of hatred. So you would most likely think that Hamas, just because of seeing friends, relatives, and innocent people killed, that would also help the recruitment for further members of Hamas. How do we stop that? Because at the moment, the fear will turn into hatred, if not already, and you do not want that when you're dealing with terrorism, because that will just feed straight into Hamas, and then the war will never finish, will it?
So I think you're right. I mean, recruitment is going to be an issue. There's a ready, available, always a group of young men, young boys that will join Hamas. The only thing Israel can do is prevent them forming a threat, so they can prevent them from acquiring sophisticated weapons, prevent them from getting close to the border. In terms of the population, it's never been possible to completely eradicate a terrorist group, but there's been many instances where it's been mostly done and they don't pose that threat anymore. So ISIS, Islamic State, controlled a large part of the Middle East. They were carrying out attacks regularly in Europe, in other places, and they've been mostly defeated. Sure, there are still some there, and there was a lot of collateral damage, and there's still terrorists, but they don't pose even 1% of the threat they did. The same is true for Al Qaeda. So these groups cannot be eliminated, but can be pretty much defeated. And we did see that as well with totalitarian regimes. We saw it with the Nazis. They were totally destroyed. Of course, there are still neo-Nazis today, but they don't have a government, they don't have a country, and they don't threaten anyone in the same way. So I think with the right amount of force, it can be done, and there may still be hate in the population, but they can be made not to pose a threat anymore, as we've seen in past examples.
Do you think the hatred will ever go away? Because at the moment, there is immense hatred. How do we, I've gone way over time here, but how do we fix it, Robert?
So I don't think it will completely go away, but I can speak as, as a Jewish person. Obviously, Germany, wronged my people a lot, but there's no hatred today. There is no hatred that Germany is now a model member of the world community. So I think the people of Gaza can be rehabilitated. People in the Middle East can be tolerant and accepting. The UAE, Dubai has great relations with Israel. So, just because it's the Middle East doesn't mean it's destined to be full of hatred. But I think it's not happening anytime soon. We need the war to end, and then we can focus on rebuilding and building ties between people. But I think we could be a generation or two away from real peace.
I totally agree with you. It's a terrible situation. And again, I have to tell you, I don't care whether it's Israel, Palestine, or Mars. Just got to stop killing those innocent people. I don't give a rat's about the politics. Just stop killing innocent people on both sides. Robert, it's been a pleasure talking with you, Robert Gregory there. If somebody wants to find out more about your organisation, Robert, how do they do that?
Look us up on any social media, Australian Jewish Association. You'll find us.
Thank you very much. Robert Gregory, Chief Executive Officer and President of the Australian Jewish Association. This is The World Today.